Join our community by subscribing. Every click helps us share more stories like this one. The introduction. On a brisk autumn evening in September 2021, the small coastal town of Havenport lay subdued under a blanket of twilight. The salty tang of the sea drifted through the air, mingling with the scent of damp earth, a tangible reminder of its proximity to nature. Seagulls let out distant cries as they circled overhead, their silhouettes stark against a fading orange sky. But beneath the town's picturesque facade, a storm brewed an atmosphere, torn by whispered secrets and unaddressed grievances. Residents went about their lives, unaware that the calm would soon be shattered by an unspeakable act. That night, a knock echoed through the simple frame house at 28 Birch Lane, a home that belonged to Mary Thompson, a beloved local librarian. A few moments later, the world within those walls would be irrevocably changed. The news of Mary's murder sent ripples throughout Havenport, igniting an investigative firestorm that would crisscross through the lives of its community. From the teenagers who lingered on the pier to the elders sharing memories at the local diner, no one could escape the shadow of suspicion that fell upon them. As darkness tightened its grip, the first responders arrived at the scene, flashing lights cutting through the night, casting eerie shadows against the quaint surroundings. Authorities quickly cordoned off the area, and grim faces were the only signs of what had transpired. Mary's lifeless body lay sprawled across her living room floor, a stark contrast to the charming decor that surrounded her. This was more than just a murder. It was a hidden truth waiting to be unraveled. And before long, the intricate web of relationships woven in Havenport would reveal secrets intertwined with betrayal, obsession, and ultimately, justice. The victim, Mary Thompson, was more than just the town librarian. She was a cornerstone of the Havenport community. With her salt and pepper curls and warm smile, she radiated a maternal warmth that beckoned both friends and strangers alike. The humble library, with its weathered brick facade and time-worn shelves, was her kingdom, a haven of knowledge where she fostered a love for literature in the hearts of generations. As a child, she often lost herself in the pages of novels, believing that stories held power. It was this belief that led her to pursue a career dedicated to unlocking the same magic for others. She organized reading clubs, storytelling sessions, and summer programs that engaged young minds, leaving an indelible mark on their lives. Her commitment to education extended beyond books. She was a mentor and confidant, effortlessly guiding everyone who sought her wisdom. Yet, beneath the surface of her commendable life lay nuances that few ever saw. Mary was divorced, her marriage ending a decade prior, a decision that still haunted her as she occasionally questioned if she'd made the right choice. Friends often noticed her slight melancholy, a lingering hint of disappointment etched in the corners of her eyes. It was whispered that she still held a flicker of hope for rekindling romance, but never found the right partner amidst the tumult of her own expectations. On weekends, she could be spotted walking along the beach, lost in deep thought, occasionally jotting down notes for the book she wished to write. Friends had suggested that she write her memoir, a chronicle of her life's ups and downs, but she always hesitated, fearful of exposing her vulnerabilities. When authorities discovered her body and began piecing together her life, What they would find was not just the tale of a cherished librarian, but a complicated narrative of longing, unresolved conflicts, and connections that might have led to commit the ultimate act of violence against her. As they delved deeper, it became glaringly obvious. Mary Thompson was both loved and loathed, a paradox that painted a target on her back. The crime scene. As the coroner's van arrived, a quiet tension enveloped the living room where Mary Thompson's life had so abruptly come to an end. Inside the home, the air was thick with the scent of cedar and old pages, yet it carried the unmistakable metallic tang of blood, and unsettling reminder of the violence that had transpired within these familiar walls. Crime scene investigators meticulously combed through the small but tidy space. Each item, from the worn-out armchair that looked out onto the street to the neatly stacked bookshelves, bore witness to the extraordinary life of a woman who had nurtured a love for stories. Now, it would become a sight etched in the town's collective memory for reasons that could never be undone. Mary lay sprawled on the floor, her once vibrant blue sweater now soaked in crimson. The splatter pattern hinted at a frenzied encounter rather than a planned execution. It was chaotic, visceral. A coffee table, adorned with a half-read novel, lay overturned, suggesting a struggle had ensued before tragedy claimed her. Detective Sarah Mitchell examined the room with a discerning eye. She noted the scattered papers near Mary's body letters, seemingly torn in haste, their ink smudged by tears, or perhaps an attempt to erase something painful. Detective Mitchell, seasoned and perceptive, felt a gut instinct unfurl. There was a story here worth chasing, one that tangled deeply in the web of relationships Mary had woven throughout her life. In the corner, a framed photograph caught her attention. It depicted Mary with a group of children at a summer reading program, faces bright and joyful. Yet, behind that image of innocence concealed a reality teeming with question. Who would want to hurt Mary? Was it an act of rage from someone she trusted? As the autumn wind howled outside, carrying with it hushed whispers from the neighbors peering through curtains, the detective stepped back, processing the scene. Each detail added to the puzzle she was determined to solve, a puzzle intricately woven with threads of human connection, sealed by a vicious act that left scars on a community already shadowed by grief. The early investigation. With the dawn of a new day, the tight grip of night's silence began to yield to the calls of early risers. The news of Mary Thompson's murder had spread like wildfire through Havenport, igniting fear and speculation among its residents. By mid-morning, the police station was abuzz with activity, the once familiar hum replaced by urgent murmurs and the clatter of keyboards. Detective Sarah Mitchell gathered her team for a briefing, the large whiteboard behind her filled with notes and photographs of the crime scene. The first step is to understand Mary's life. She had deep ties here, and we need to speak to the people who knew her best. She began, her voice steady yet laced with the weight of their task. The community members had immediately begun to share their shock. At the diner, where Mary was a regular patron, voices rose in fervent conversations. Over cups of coffee, patrons dissected the possible motives behind the unraveling tragedy. Some suspected jealousy stemming from Mary's relationships, while others whispered of a couple of library patrons who had become increasingly combative in recent months. Detective Mitchell and her partner, Officer James Dunn, first visited the library. They spoke to Sarah Pine, Mary's assistant, who was notably distraught. With trembling hands, she recounted the last few days before the murder. She seemed off, Sarah admitted. There was something in her tone as if she were burdened by a heavy secret. She mentioned that someone had been trying to reach her. The detectives dug deeper, tracing the origins of the torn letters found at the crime scene. Their investigation led them to an out-of-town man named Ethan Caldwell, who had a history of disputes with Mary over overdue materials and library policies. Unbeknownst to them, his obsession had taken root long before Mary's demise, a dark seed watered by desperation. As their inquiries gathered momentum, it became awfully clear. Every detail revealed overlaps, connections that painted a tumultuous picture. The investigation would require delicate handling, with small-town relationships providing both insights and obstacles. Sarah sensed the tangled emotions hidden under the surface, ready to erupt as more questions were posed. Who would harbor malice against the woman who had dedicated her life to nurturing the minds of others? With each interview, the truth began to inch nearer, albeit shrouded in layers of grief and suspicion ready to unfold. The dead ends. The days rolled on, and as autumn leaves fell in disarray, so too did the hopes of a swift resolution. Detective Sarah Mitchell and Officer James Dunn had plunged headfirst into a maze of interviews and investigation, yet their progress felt agonizingly slow. Each conversation seemed to circle back on itself, leading to dead ends that only deepened the mystery surrounding Mary's death. The first arrest came days after the murder. A disheveled man found loitering near the library, who argued passionately with officers about his right to read freely. His history of petty crime made him a suspect, but after a thorough investigation, it turned out he had an alibi. Panic simmered as the detectives recognized that their once bubbling confidence was draining away with each wasted lead. Ethan Caldwell, the overly fixated patron, was brought in for questioning, but he too proved a dead end. Overwhelmed by anxiety, he immediately deflected. "I never meant to make her upset. I just wanted help with my project," he pleaded, the sincerity in his voice making it difficult for the detectives to find corroborating evidence linking him to the crime. No fingerprints, no messages sent. Just an earnest, heavy-hearted man who expressed regret for his erratic behavior. Next, they turned their attention to Mary's ex-husband, Mary Thompson. With a history marred by prolonged bitterness, his name surfaced on the list of potential suspects. However, he had an alibi confirmed by multiple friends, along with a solid reputation in the community, and once again they were left grappling with unanswered questions. As cold fronts swept across the coastline, closing in on Havenport, Detective Mitchell felt the weight of frustration press against her. Each hour spent poring over case files and reviewing witness statements amplified the isolating dread of the unknown. A twinge of self-doubt crept in. Would they uncover the truth before the town turned to mistrust against itself? Late one night, as Sarah sat alone in her cluttered office, running her fingers across a map of Havenport, dotted with suspects and clues, a thought struck her. Events around Mary might not just be confined to her professional realm, but could extend to her personal life. It required a fresh approach to untangle the complexities intertwined in Mary's existence. Sometimes, in pursuing justice, one must step outside the bounds of the expected to unearth hidden truths. Determined, Sarah made notes for the following day's meeting, pivoting her focus toward the deeper connections that lay just beneath the surface of this seemingly simple yet perplexing case. A break in the case. The chilly morning of October 10, awakened a sense of urgency in Detective Sarah Mitchell. A faint spark flickered within her as she reflected on the tangled connections involving Mary Thompson. She decided it was time to reach out to the people who had shared a more intimate relationship with her, those who had walked alongside Mary in her quieter moments, likely holding pieces of the puzzle that others could not see. The first destination was the local coffee shop, a cozy nook where Mary often found solace amid busy townsfolk. There she met Lisa Torres, a close friend and fellow book lover. With a shaky breath, Lisa recounted a conversation they had a week before Mary's death. She seemed restless, speaking in riddles about feeling trapped, like she had to choose between moving forward and being punished for her past. She revealed, her eyes brimming with tears. Mary mentioned someone reaching out to her in anger. The mention of anger struck a chord in Sarah's mind. The name echoed as a casualty of Mary's past. The world of old lovers and youthful mistakes gnawed at the detective's instincts, reigniting her ambition to delve deeper into Mary's personal history. Maintaining a calm demeanor, Sarah pressed Lisa for more. "I think it was someone from her passed down old friend turned friend. Maybe." Lisa's voice cracked. As they continued their conversation, something shifted in Sarah's perception of Mary. She was starting to appear less as an innocent victim, and more as a complex tapestry of dreams and commitments, fears and conflicts. Later that day, Sarah and James dove back into Mary's records, examining her life before Havenport. Their persistence led them to uncover a series of interactions Mary had with a former acquaintance, Daniel Hayes. Daniel had been a bright light in her teenage years, but had dwindled into a shadow, diagnosed with severe emotional instability following a series of personal tragedies. It felt as if they struck gold. Researching his recent whereabouts and social media revealed a profile rife with vitriol aimed at Mary. Messages riddled with past grievances, a palpable sense of betrayal hung in every word. It became evident that Daniel viewed her as a figure unfulfilled, a promise, the one who had escaped him while he floundered in his failures. With this newfound lead, Sarah could finally see a crack forming in the wall of their investigation. She knew they still needed more evidence, but the sliver of hope ignited a renewed vigor in the team. As the sun began to set, casting an amber light across Havenport, Sarah felt the pulse of justice quickening. The pieces were finally starting to align, and she was prepared to piece together Mary's story, whatever consequence awaited. The suspect, fueled by the tantalizing lead regarding Daniel Hayes, Detective Sarah Mitchell coordinated a plan to bring him in for questioning. His recent social media rants filled with bitterness and resentment towards Mary warranted serious scrutiny. The once vibrant teenage friendship that had once flourished between Mary and Daniel had long since soured, twisting into something dark and twisted. As they approached Daniel's apartment in a neglected part of town, a cold wind howled through the alleyways, a fitting backdrop for what lay ahead. The building stood grim and weary, its exterior marred by fading paint and graffitied walls that whispered stories of neglect. Sarah exchanged a knowing glance with Officer James Dunn. They both felt the weight of anticipation thicken the air around them. Inside, the dim light struggled to penetrate the gloom of the narrow corridor. The scent of smoke and stale air permeated the space, creating an atmosphere that felt heavy with secret. They made their way to apartment 3B, where they knocked softly, though judging by the clutter of notices taped to the door, they doubted he was unaware of their presence. When the door creaked open, revealing Daniel, there was an unsettling contrast between his disheveled appearance and the unsettling calm that blanketed his demeanor. His eyes flicked from Sarah to James, and within them simmered a cocktail of irritation and unease. "What do you want?" he muttered, barely disguising his annoyance. "We'd like to ask you a few questions about Mary Thompson," Sarah replied, her tone steady but firm. Daniel raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms defensively. "What do I have to do with that librarian? She didn't even care about me after everything." There was a tremor in his voice, revealing the unspoken pain that threaded through their shared history. As the interrogation unfolded, Daniel's nonchalance began to crack, revealing cracks of frustration and anger. He tainted himself as a man scorned who had reached out to Mary for help, believing she would be there for him in his darkest hours. Yet he was met with silence. Instead, what he felt was betrayal. "I needed her. I was at my lowest point, and all she did was forget me," he lamented, the bitter edge to his words slicing through the air. With every response, circumstantial evidence piled against him. The detectives noted the marks where guilt clung to his words like shadow-siege denial, only served to dig him deeper into a pit of suspicion. However, as familiar with this game as she was, Sarah noticed the subtle way he fidgeted, the quiver in his hands betraying the carefully constructed facade of indifference he wore. As they concluded the interview, Sarah couldn't shake the sense that Daniel was hiding something profound beneath his fragile bravado. As he stumbled through inconsistencies, truth wove its way through deception like threads in a tapestry. And she began to suspect this was merely the beginning. He was their suspect, yes, but the unexplored layers of his story hinted at a darkness that extended beyond mere resentment, a force driven by desperation, craving, and the unfulfilled desire to belong. The questions remained, and Sarah was determined to peel back the layers. The trial. The crisp winter air outside the Havenport courthouse felt charged with anxious anticipation as the trial for Daniel Hayes loomed on the horizon. The small town, once idyllic and serene, now bore the weight of a collective grief that paralyzed its residents. Mary Thompson's murder had left scars that ran deep, and with the trial date finally set, the echoes of her life hovered heavily in the chamber. The courtroom was filled to capacity, a congregation of familiar faces, friends, family, and concerned townsfolk, who all waited justice for the woman they had cherished. As the doors swung open, a murmur rippled through the room, and silence fell like a shroud. Sarah Mitchell sat at the prosecutor's table, determination steeling her spine. She had spent countless hours preparing for this day, combing through the evidence to construct a narrative that would resonate with the jury. Daniel sat across the room, his once confident demeanor now cloaked in anxiety. He had traded his weary apartment for an ill-fitting suit, a facade of constructed innocence that failed to mask the resentment etched across his features. As the judge entered and proceedings began, the atmosphere thickened with an unsettling tension. The prosecution launched its case by carefully outlining the timeline of Mary's last days and the pattern of Daniel's obsessive behavior. Sarah presented evidence of the messages he had sent, layered with rage and desperation, intertwining snippets of Mary's own fears that painted a grim picture of their fractured past. The emotional weight of the testimony hung like fog, blurring the line between justice and compassion. The defense mounted a counterattack, portraying Daniel as a mere victim of circumstance, a troubled man caught in the currents of his own failures, the kind of narrative that sought to elicit sympathy rather than accountability. They argued that the lack of forensic evidence linked him directly to the crime, as there were no fingerprints, no solid alibis pointing him to the murder, and many were persuaded by the veil of doubt their arguments invoked. As Sarah took the stand to recount the investigation, the tension crescendoed. "This isn't just a case of murder," she declared, her voice steady yet charged with emotion. "It's a case of abandonment, of unanswered calls in the dark. Mary Thompson was not just estranged from Daniel. She was fighting a battle against her own past, a past he couldn't let go of. As days turned into a rhythm of witness testimonies, emotions surged, high-rippled with anger, sorrow, and disbelief. Mary's friends shared stories of her compassion, her unwavering support, and the profound impact she had made in their lives. The jury's deliberation lasted 3 grueling days, each hour packed with an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. When the verdict finally echoed through the hallowed halls of justice, the air hung thick with collective breath held tight. "Guilty," the foreman announced, the word reverberating like a tolling bell, breaking the stillness. Tears spilled down faces as relief and grief washed over the courtroom. Justice, however imperfect, was served. Yet, as Sarah felt the tension lift from her shoulders, she realized that even amidst this resolution, the wounds would take time to heal. Mary's memory would forever be entwined with what had transpired, a reminder of everything that could have been. As she walked out of the courthouse into the quiet streets of Havenport, she understood that while justice had been achieved, the echoes of Mary's story would linger far beyond the trial, carved into the hearts of those she had touched, forever haunting the town that had lost her. The aftermath. The snow melted away as spring began to bloom in Havenport. Yet for many, the chill of winter lingered longer in their heart. The aftermath of Mary Thompson's murder and the subsequent trial reverberated throughout the town, shaping or reshaping relationships and perspectives, deepening both bonds and rifts. Detective Sarah Mitchell found herself revisiting the library regularly, not just as a sanctuary of memories, but as a reminder of the life lost amidst whispers and pages. It was here that Mary had built her world, a space filled with laughter, the rustle of turning leaves, and the warmth of countless stories. Now, however, the library felt eerily quiet, a shelter hosting an air of mourning that was palpable in its stillness. Sarah watched as villagers trickled in and out, keeping their heads bowed as if acknowledging an unspoken loss as they passed the worn shelf. Children who once ran to Mary for book recommendations now moved cautiously, unsure how to navigate a space suffused with such sorrow. Parents whispered soft reassurances, but no amount of comfort could dull the chord struck by Mary's absence. In the weeks following the trial, various community initiatives sprang up in Mary's honor. A memorial reading program was established, inviting locals to share their stories and read aloud selections from Mary's favorite books. Sarah attended the first session, her heart heavy but filled with purpose. The warmth in that room came alive with shared memories. Each were a tribute to the quiet force of kindness Mary had embodied. Though the community sought to heal, some were still grappling with anger. Protests against Daniel Hayes grew louder after the verdict, demanding higher accountability for those driven by obsession. Social media exploded with divided opinions, many demanding harsher treatment for those with mental health issues who posed risks to others. Sarah quietly monitored the discourse, feeling the uncertainty ripple through her thoughts. The balance between justice and compassion seemed fragile, and she knew navigating those waters would be essential. For Sarah, the case had irrevocably changed her. Nights were still haunted by fleeting images of Mary's lifeless body, but they began to transform into reflections on the importance of dialogue, of striving for connection rather than allowing distance to fester. She envisioned a police initiative addressing not only crime prevention but also community healing, encouraging open conversations about mental health and the stories behind individuals before they fell victims to despair. As summer approached, Sarah leaned into the hope that lingered alongside the shadow of loss. Mary's legacy continued to weave through Havenport, binding its residents with an unspoken resolve to ensure that compassion would reign over bitterness, that any story would be met with open ears rather than cold judgment. The path toward healing would be long, but Sarah's commitment remained unwavering. It was time, she decided, to turn to the present to honor Mary's memory, not with lingering grief, but with action fueled by understanding and unity. And maybe, just maybe, they could all emerge from the darkness together, carrying echoes of the past into a brighter future. Reflection. As the days turned into weeks, Detective Sarah Mitchell found herself often retreating to the pier where Mary Thompson had spent countless evenings watching the sun dip into the horizon of vibrant canvas, painted with hues of orange and purple mirrored by the tranquil sea. The rhythmic lapping of waves provided a meditative backdrop as she reflected on the life taken too soon and the complex tapestry of emotions that had unfolded. Mary's story had layered itself into Sarah's life in ways she hadn't anticipated. It was more than a job, more than simply solving a crime. It was a reminder of the fragility of existence, the delicacy of human connection that could shatter with the wrong choice or misplaced anger. She thought of the faces of those who had loved Mary, countless stories entwined with moments that now felt all the more precious. Her laughter echoing through the halls of the library, the warmth in every book she'd shared. At times, Sarah struggled against waves of guilt that ebbed and flowed, the lingering thought that perhaps she could have done something, anything, that might have changed the trajectory of that fateful night. With each moment spent on the pier, she recognized the need to release that burden, allowing grief to settle like water to its rightful place, not forgotten, but transformed into strength. In the quiet solitude, the detective vowed to carry forth a legacy that honored Mariah's pledge to advocate for those drowning in their own turmoil, to reshape the dialogue around mental health, pushing against the stigma that often silenced voices before they cried out for help. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the water, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. Though Mary's absence left a piercing void, she aimed to transform that loss into a force for good. Hope lingered, blossoming amid the darkness, driven by an unyielding commitment to ensuring that no one else would feel as alone as Mary had on that tragic night.